The sulfur smell never really left the equipment, no matter how much industrial cleaner Reese scrubbed into the metal. She worked the brush in small circles over her tactical vest, watching yellowish foam swirl down the drain of the decontamination bay. 3 days since the Portland incident, and her gear still reeked like a chemistry experiment gone wrong. "You missed a spot on the left shoulder plate," Ortega called from across the bay, hanging his own vest on the drying rack. "Looks like something tried to take a bite out of it." Reese twisted to examine the damage. Sure enough, what looked like teeth marks had scraped deep gouges in the ballistic material. She couldn't remember when that had happened during the chaos at the warehouse. Time moved differently when you were fighting things that shouldn't exist. "At least it didn't go through," she muttered, running her thumb along the scratches. "I'm getting tired of explaining bullet holes to the medical team." The Paranormal Response Division occupied the basement levels of a government building in downtown Kansas City that most people assumed housed tax auditors. Nobody questioned the trucks coming and going at odd hours, or the fact that none of the windows on floors 3 through 7 were visible from street level. It was the perfect cover for the kind of work that made conspiracy theorists sound reasonable. Reese had been with the PRD for 4 years now, ever since a college degree in applied physics and a military background in explosive ordnance disposal had somehow qualified her to fight demons. The job posting had been vague, mentioning only specialized tactical response and anomalous threat containment. She'd figured it meant disarming dirty bombs or chemical weapons. She'd been wrong. "Malik's calling a team meeting in 20, Ortega said, checking his phone. "Probably wants to debrief Portland again. You know how he gets when we lose equipment." "We didn't lose equipment. We destroyed equipment. There's a difference." Reese hung up her vest and grabbed a clean towel. That flamethrower was contaminated beyond salvage after it got inside that thing's mouth. Tell that to accounting. The locker room was quiet, except for the hum of industrial fans cycling filtered air. Reese changed out of her decontamination suit and into clean fatigues, tucking her dark hair back into a regulation bun. Her reflection in the metal mirror looked tired. The job aged people fast, and not just because of the physical demands. Knowing what really lurked in the dark corners of the world took a toll. She grabbed her tablet and headed upstairs to the briefing room. The hallways were painted institutional beige and lined with motivational posters that would look normal in any office building if you didn't know what the acronyms really stood for. PRD, Protecting Reality Daily, was taped next to a photo of a sunset over wheat fields. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Malik was already in the briefing room when she arrived, reviewing files on his laptop. The team leader was a compact man in his 50s with graying temples and the kind of stillness that came from years of military service. He'd never told anyone his first name, and after 4 years, Reese had stopped wondering about it. "Ortega's running late," Malik said without looking up. Something about his gear not drying properly. "The hazmat suits take forever," Reese agreed, settling into her usual chair. "Are we really debriefing Portland again? I thought we covered everything in the after-action report." "No, this is something new." Malik closed his laptop and leaned back. "We've got a situation developing that might require our attention." Baptiste and Rivera filed in together, still arguing about something from their own equipment cleaning. The team's tech specialist and medic made an odd pair. Baptiste was tall and angular with nervous energy that kept his hands constantly moving, while Rivera was built like a linebacker and spoke in the careful, measured tones of someone who'd seen too much trauma. They took seats across from Reese and continued their debate in whispers. "Now that we're all here," Malik began, then paused as his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted. "Hold on, this might be relevant." He swiped to answer the call. "Malik here. What kind of readings? How long ago? I see. Yes, we'll need the full package. Send it to my terminal." Reese felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that came before a deployment. After 4 years, she'd learned to trust that feeling. The team's last 3 days of downtime were about to end. Malik hung up and immediately started typing on his laptop. "We've got a potential Class 3 breach in progress. Seismic monitoring picked up some unusual activity about 2 hours ago." "Where?" Baptiste asked, already pulling out his own tablet. "Farmland outside Salina, middle of nowhere, which is good for containment, but bad for response time." Malik's fingers flew over the keyboard. "The energy signature is building. If this follows the standard pattern, we've got maybe 6 hours before full manifestation." Rivera was reading over Baptiste's shoulder. "What's the preliminary classification?" "Unknown entity, but the power readings are consistent with a major threat designation." Malik's laptop chimed as new data arrived. "Geological survey shows some interesting features in that area. Limestone caves, underground water systems, and..." He paused, scrolling through the information. 3 missing persons reports in the last month, all within a 5-mile radius. Reese felt her pulse quicken. Missing persons near a developing breach was never a good sign. Sometimes people just wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes the things coming through were actively hunting. "What's our timeline?" she asked. "Gear up in 30, wheels up in 60. We'll get the full briefing en route." Malik stood and started gathering his materials. "Baptiste, I need a full sensor package loaded. Rivera, prep the medical kit for potential civilian casualties. Ortega, double-check the weapons loadout. We might be dealing with something new." As the team scattered to their preparations, Reese lingered for a moment in the briefing room. The walls were covered with maps and charts that tracked paranormal activity across the Midwest. Red pins marking confirmed breaches and yellow ones indicating areas of interest. There were a lot more pins than there had been when she'd started. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at her sister's number. Maya lived in Denver with her husband and 2 kids, completely unaware that her sister spent her weekends fighting creatures from literal hell. Their last conversation had been about Maya's oldest starting kindergarten and whether Reese would make it to the school play next month. Reese typed out a quick message. "Work trip came up. Might be out of touch for a few days. Tell the kids I love them." She hit send and headed for the equipment room. The heavy steel door required both a keycard and a biometric scanner, and it always made a satisfying thunk when the locks disengaged. Inside, rows of tactical gear hung from numbered hooks like some kind of specialized armor. Each team member's equipment was tailored to their role and personal preferences, tested and retested until every piece felt like an extension of their body. Reese pulled her vest from its hook and began the familiar ritual of getting ready for deployment. Ballistic plates went in first, ceramic inserts that could stop most conventional rounds, and some unconventional ones. Communications gear came next: headset, radio, and backup transponder in case things went really wrong. Her sidearm was a modified .45 that fired rounds made from blessed silver and cold iron, effective against most entities they encountered. The heavier weapons were stored in a separate armory, accessible only during active deployments. Reese grabbed her kit bag and headed there to collect her primary weapon, a shotgun loaded with specialized shells that Baptiste had designed specifically for paranormal threats. The rounds contained a mixture of blessed salt, iron filings, and a compound that burned at temperatures high enough to disrupt most demonic manifestations. "You ready for this?" Ortega asked, loading magazines into his tactical vest. "I've got a bad feeling about this one." "You have a bad feeling about all of them," Reese replied, checking her gear systematically. "What makes this one different?" "The location. Middle of nowhere. No witnesses. Plenty of space for something big to manifest without anyone noticing until it's too late." Ortega holstered his sidearm and picked up his rifle. "Plus 3 missing persons? That's not random. Something's been preparing." Baptiste appeared in the armory doorway, arms full of electronic equipment. "The sensor data just updated. Whatever's happening out there, it's accelerating. We might have less time than we thought." "How much less?" Reese asked. Maybe 4 hours to full breach. Possibly 3. Baptiste's usual nervous energy had ramped up another notch. The energy curve is steeper than normal. This thing's in a hurry. Malik's voice echoed through the facility's intercom system. Transport leaves in 15 minutes. Final gear check, then we roll. Reese slung her shotgun and headed for the vehicle bay. The PRD's tactical van looked like any other utility vehicle from the outside, but the interior had been modified with equipment racks, communications gear, and seating for a 5-person team. Heavy-duty suspension and run-flat tires allowed it to handle rough terrain, and the engine had enough power to outrun most conventional threats. The late afternoon sun felt harsh after the fluorescent lighting of the underground facility. Reese loaded her gear into the van's rear compartment and took her usual seat behind the driver. Malik would drive, with Baptiste riding shotgun to monitor the sensor equipment during transit. Rivera and Ortega filled out the remaining seats, their gear organized within easy reach. Estimated travel time is 90 minutes, Malik announced as he started the engine. Baptiste will brief us on what we know once we're on the highway. The van pulled out of the underground garage and into normal city traffic. To anyone watching, they looked like utility workers heading to a job site. The equipment in the back was covered by tarps, and their tactical gear was hidden under casual clothing. Maintaining the illusion of normalcy was part of the job. Once they reached the interstate, Baptiste opened his laptop and connected to the facility's database through an encrypted satellite link. The screen filled with seismic readings, energy measurements, and satellite imagery of the target area. The breach point appears to be centered on a section of farmland about 12 miles west of Salina, Baptiste began, his voice taking on the clinical tone he used for technical briefings. The property belongs to a family named Morrison, husband, wife, and teenage daughter. They were evacuated 3 hours ago under the cover of a gas leak investigation. "What about the missing persons?" Rivera asked. "First disappearance was 3 weeks ago. Local man named James Fletcher, age 34, went hiking in the area and never came home. Second was 2 weeks later. Sarah Collins, college student from Kansas State, was doing research on local geology. Third was just 5 days ago. Teenage couple from Salina went out there too." Baptiste paused diplomatically. "To spend time together. Their car was found abandoned." Reese stared out the window at the passing farmland. 3 people, different ages and backgrounds, all vanishing near the same location. It could be coincidence, but the PRD had learned not to believe in coincidences. "Any physical evidence at the disappearance sites?" Ortega asked. Local sheriff's department found some unusual burn patterns near Fletcher's last known location. Circular areas where the grass was completely dead, about 10 feet in diameter. No chemical residue, no obvious explanation. Baptiste scrolled through crime scene photos on his laptop. Similar patterns were found near the abandoned car. "Burn patterns suggest energy discharge," Malik observed, "consistent with portal formation, but the timeline's too long. Most breaches happen fast, hours, not weeks." "That's what worries me," Baptiste admitted. "This thing's been building slowly, which means it's either very powerful or very intelligent. Maybe both." The van ate up miles of highway as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. Reese checked her weapons for the 3rd time, making sure everything was properly loaded and secured. The familiar weight of her gear was reassuring, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into something bigger than their usual assignments. "Update from headquarters," Malik announced, reading from his phone. "Seismic activity is intensifying. They're detecting microfractures in the local bedrock consistent with dimensional instability." "How long until we arrive?" Rivera asked. 45 minutes to the staging area, then another 20 minutes to the actual site. Malik adjusted the van's course slightly as they passed a highway sign for Salina. "We'll set up a perimeter and assess the situation before committing to engagement." Baptiste's laptop chimed with an incoming data packet. He opened the file and his expression grew serious. "We've got a problem. Satellite imagery from 30 minutes ago shows new thermal signatures at the breach site. Multiple sources, moving in organized patterns. How many? Malik asked. At least 6 distinct heat signatures, possibly more. They're clustered around what appears to be the primary breach point. Baptiste enhanced the image, though the resolution wasn't good enough to make out details. Whatever came through, it wasn't alone. Reese felt the familiar pre-combat calm settling over her. Fear was a luxury they couldn't afford once the shooting started. Training took over, reducing everything to simple priorities. Protect civilians, contain the threat, survive to fight another day. ETA 30 minutes, Malik announced. Everyone run final equipment checks. We go in fast and quiet, assess the situation, then decide on our approach based on what we find. The van's interior fell silent, except for the sound of the engine and the quiet clicks of weapons being checked and rechecked. Outside, the Kansas countryside rolled past in the gathering dusk. Peaceful farmland that had no idea what was about to happen in its midst. Reese closed her eyes and ran through her equipment list one more time. Shotgun loaded with specialized rounds, sidearm with silver core bullets, blessed salt grenades, emergency medical kit, communications gear, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. It would have to be enough. The van slowed as they approached their destination, and Malik's voice cut through the silence. Welcome to Kansas, people. Let's go save the world. The Morrison farm sat in a shallow valley surrounded by gently rolling hills covered in winter wheat. From their vantage point, on a ridge half a mile away, the property looked peaceful in the evening light. White farmhouse, red barn, grain silos catching the last rays of sun. But Reese could see the wrongness even from this distance. The cattle were gone. "Where are the animals?" she asked, adjusting her binoculars. "Evacuated with the family," Baptiste replied, setting up his sensor equipment on the van's tailgate. Though according to the sheriff's report, most of the livestock had already disappeared over the past 2 weeks. Disappeared how? Farmer found empty pastures one morning. No fence damage, no blood, no tracks leading away. 40 head of cattle, just gone. Malik studied the farm through his own binoculars. Any sign of our heat signatures? Baptiste checked his thermal scanner. Negative on infrared. Whatever was moving around down there is either left or found somewhere to hide. Underground, Rivera said grimly. The geological survey mentioned caves. Reese scanned the farmhouse and outbuildings systematically. Nothing moved in the windows, and the vehicles were gone from the driveway. But something felt off about the whole scene, like looking at a photograph that had been subtly altered. "There," Ortega said, pointing toward the barn. "Look at the ground around the big doors." Reese focused her binoculars on the area he'd indicated. The earth around the barn entrance was dark and cracked, forming concentric circles that extended about 30 feet from the building. The grass within those circles was completely dead, black stubble that looked burned, but somehow worse. "That's our breach point," Malik decided. "Baptiste, what are your readings?" "Electromagnetic activity is off the charts. Radiation levels are elevated but not dangerous to humans. Dimensional stability index is quotation mark." Baptiste paused, double-checking his instruments. "This can't be right." "What is it?" "According to these readings, reality is paper-thin down there. Whatever opened that breach punched a hole right through to something else, and the barrier between dimensions is barely holding." Malik lowered his binoculars. "Recommendations?" "We need to move fast," Baptiste said. "If that dimensional barrier collapses completely, we could be looking at a permanent gateway. And judging by the energy signatures, whatever's on the other side is not friendly." The team gathered around the van to review their approach. Aerial photos of the farm were spread across the hood, marked with approach routes and escape paths. The barn sat in the center of the property, surrounded by open ground that offered no cover but good visibility in all directions. "Standard breach protocol," Malik decided. "We approach from the north, using the farmhouse for cover. Baptiste monitors dimensional stability while Rivera stays with the equipment as our communications link. Ortega and Reese take point on the barn. "What about the missing people?" Rivera asked. "If they're still alive, they're probably down in those caves. But our first priority is containing the breach before it spreads." Reese checked her gear one final time and shouldered her pack. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. But darkness would be their ally tonight, providing cover for their approach and concealing their movements from whatever was waiting in the barn. They moved down the hillside in single file, Malik leading and Ortega bringing up the rear. The winter wheat rustled softly in the evening breeze, and Reese could smell the earthy scent of farmland mixed with something else, something that reminded her of burnt metal and old blood. The farmhouse was dark and empty, windows staring blankly across the fields. Malik led them around to the back porch, where they crouched in the deep shadows cast by the building. From here, the barn was only 100 yards away, but those yards would be completely exposed. Baptiste set up his portable sensors and immediately started getting readings that made him curse under his breath. "The dimensional distortion is getting worse. Whatever's maintaining that portal is drawing more power." "How much time do we have?" Malik whispered. "Maybe an hour before the barrier fails completely. After that..." Baptiste shook his head. "I've never seen readings like this. We could be looking at a cascade failure that opens doorways for hundreds of miles." "Then we end this now." Malik signaled for Reese and Ortega to move toward the barn. "Baptiste, Rivera, maintain communications and monitor R6. If this goes bad, call for extraction and get the data back to headquarters." Reese sprinted across the open ground, her boots silent on the soft earth. The barn loomed larger as she approached, and she could see that the dead grass formed intricate patterns around the building. Not random burn marks, but deliberate symbols carved into the living earth. Whatever had done this was intelligent and methodical. She pressed herself against the barn's western wall, breathing hard from the sprint. The wood felt warm against her back, as if something inside was generating tremendous heat. Ortega appeared beside her a moment later, rifle ready. "You hear that?" he whispered. Reese listened. Beneath the normal sounds of evening on a farm, she could hear a low humming that seemed to come from deep underground. It was barely audible, more felt than heard, but it made her teeth ache. "Sounds like machinery," she murmured back. "Or chanting." They moved toward the barn's main entrance, stepping carefully around the burned symbols in the earth. Up close, Reese could see that the markings weren't just scorched grass. They'd been carved deep into the soil and filled with something that looked like metallic ash. The symbols themselves were complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The barn doors were closed, but not locked. Malik's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Baptiste's readings just spiked. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast." Reese positioned herself to the left of the doors while Ortega took the right. They'd done this drill dozens of times in training, and several times for real. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. Ortega yanked the door open, and Reese swept inside, shotgun ready. The barn's interior was a maze of farm equipment and hay bales, but her attention immediately fixed on the center of the space where the concrete floor had been torn away to reveal a gaping hole in the earth. The hole was perfectly circular, about 15 feet across, and lined with the same metallic ash that filled the symbols outside. But the real attention grabber was what surrounded it. 3 people hung suspended in midair around the circumference of the hole, held in place by cables or ropes that seemed to be made of the same ash-like material. They were alive. Reese could see their chests rising and falling, but they appeared to be unconscious. 2 men and a woman, dressed in civilian clothes that matched the descriptions of the missing persons. "Malik, we've got the missing people," Reese reported. "They're alive but suspended over some kind of pit." "Negative on moving them," Ortega added, studying the cables. "These restraints look booby-trapped. If we cut them wrong, they fall into whatever's down there. The humming sound was much louder inside the barn, and Reese could feel it vibrating through the floorboards. Looking down into the hole, she could see a faint red glow emanating from far below, as if something was burning in the depths. Baptiste says dimensional stability just dropped another 20%. Malik's voice was tight with urgency. You need to disrupt whatever's powering that portal. Reese approached the edge of the hole carefully, noting that the cables holding the 3 people were anchored to metal stakes driven into the concrete around the circumference. The stakes themselves were carved with more of the geometric symbols, and they pulsed with the same red light that came from below. It's a ritual circle, she realized. The missing people aren't prisoners, they're components. Their life force is being used to power the portal. Can we break the circle without killing them? Ortega asked. Before Reese could answer, the humming sound changed pitch, and the red glow from below intensified. The 3 suspended people began to stir, their heads lifting as if they were slowly waking up. Company's coming, Baptiste's voice crackled through their earpieces. Multiple contacts emerging from underground. They're big. The first creature climbed out of the hole with fluid grace, despite its size. It stood nearly 8 feet tall and moved like a predator, all muscle and controlled power. Its skin was the color of dried blood, and it had too many arms. 4 instead of 2, each ending in hands that could have palmed a basketball. But the worst part was its face, which was almost human, except for the rows of needle-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed like coals. It saw Reese and Ortega immediately and let out a sound that was part roar, part laugh. More creatures began climbing out of the hole behind it, each one slightly different but sharing the same basic template of nightmare anatomy. "Open fire!" Reese shouted, raising her shotgun. The specialized rounds hit the first creature center mass and it screamed, its skin bubbling and smoking where the blessed salt and iron made contact. But it didn't go down. Instead, it charged forward with terrifying speed. Ortega's rifle chattered as he laid down covering fire, his rounds punching holes in the creature but barely slowing it down. More demons were emerging from the hole. Reese counted at least 6 before she stopped counting and focused on staying alive. She rolled behind a hay bale as clawed hands raked the air where her head had been. The creature that had charged her was wounded, but far from dead, and its friends were spreading out to flank them. "We need backup," Ortega called out, changing magazines. "Negative." Malik's voice was grim. "You're on your own until you can disrupt that portal. We can't risk more people until the dimensional breach is contained." Reese popped up from cover and put 2 more rounds into the nearest demon. This time it went down, but the others were learning to spread out and use the farm equipment for cover. One of them was climbing up into the barn's loft, positioning itself for an attack from above. "The stakes!" she yelled to Ortega. "We need to destroy the ritual stakes." "Working on it." Ortega had switched to his sidearm and was methodically shooting at the metal stakes around the hole's perimeter. Each hit sent sparks flying and caused the red glow to flicker, but the stakes were tough, and he was having to fight off demons at the same time. The creature in the loft dropped down behind Reese's position, moving with cat-like silence. She spun around just in time to see it landing, its 4 arms spread wide to grab her. Her shotgun was already coming up, and she fired point-blank into its torso. The blast sent it flying backward into a pile of farm tools, but she could see it was already trying to get up. These things were incredibly tough, and her ammunition wasn't unlimited. "Baptiste, how much longer until barrier failure?" she called out. 15 minutes, maybe less." One of the ritual stakes sparked and went dark as Ortega's bullets finally damaged it enough to disrupt its function. Immediately, the humming sound changed pitch and the red glow from the hole dimmed slightly. But there were still 7 more stakes to go. A new sound echoed up from the depths. Something much larger was climbing toward the surface. The demons that were already in the barn suddenly became more aggressive, pressing their attack as if they were trying to buy time for whatever was coming up behind them. Reese made a decision that probably qualified as crazy even by PRD standards. She slung her shotgun and pulled out 2 salt grenades, arming them both with quick twists of their pins. Ortega, when I say now, dump everything you have into those stakes. She sprinted directly toward the hole, dodging claws and teeth, and dove into a baseball slide that carried her to the very edge of the pit. Looking down, she could see something massive climbing up the walls of the shaft, something that made the other demons look small by comparison. "Now!" she shouted, and hurled both grenades down into the hole. Ortega's rifle opened up on full automatic, his remaining ammunition chewing through ritual stakes in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The humming sound became a shriek as the circle's power fluctuated wildly. The grenades detonated far below, and the roar that echoed up from the depths was loud enough to rattle the barn's walls. The climbing creature screamed in pain and rage, and Reese could hear it falling back into whatever lay at the bottom of the shaft. 4 more stakes went dark under Ortega's fire, and suddenly the cables holding the 3 missing people dissolved, dropping them gently to the barn floor as the ritual circle's power failed completely. The remaining demons seemed to realize their situation had changed. Without the portal's energy to sustain them, they were cut off from their source of power. They fought with desperate fury, but Reese and Ortega's blessed ammunition was taking a much heavier toll now. The last demon fell just as Baptiste's voice crackled urgently through their earpieces. "Dimensional barrier is stabilizing. Portal collapse in progress." The hole in the barn floor began to close, reality reasserting itself as the breach sealed. The red glow faded to nothing, and the terrible humming finally stopped. In the sudden silence, Reese could hear the 3 rescued people groaning as they slowly regained consciousness. Breach contained. Malik's voice was relieved. "Good work, people. Rivera's bringing medical supplies for the civilians." Reese slumped against a hay bale, exhaustion hitting her as the adrenaline faded. Her ears were ringing from the gunfire, and she could smell cordite mixed with the sulfur stench of dead demons. But they'd won. The portal was closed, the missing people were safe, and whatever had been climbing up from below was trapped on the other side. "You know what the worst part is?" Ortega said, reloading his rifle out of habit. "What's that?" "We're going to have to explain to the Morrison family why their barn floor has a 15-foot hole in it." Reese laughed, surprising herself. "Gas leak explosion. Very tragic, but insurance should cover it." The 3 rescued civilians were sitting up now, confused and disoriented but apparently unharmed. Rivera arrived with medical supplies and immediately began checking their vital signs, while Baptiste packed up his sensor equipment. "Dimensional readings are back to normal," Baptiste reported. "Whatever they were trying to summon is stuck on the other side, and the portal won't be opening again anytime soon." Malik appeared in the barn doorway, surveying the scene with satisfaction. "Clean extraction, minimal civilian exposure, and threat contained. I'd call this a successful operation." "What about the bodies?" Ortega asked, gesturing to the dead demons. "Cleanup crew will handle it. By tomorrow morning, this will just be another farm that had an unfortunate gas leak accident." Malik checked his watch. "We'll debrief back at headquarters, but good work tonight. All of you." As they helped the 3 civilians to the van, Reese found herself thinking about her sister's text from earlier. Maya's world of school plays and kindergarten worries seemed impossibly distant from what had just happened in this barn. But that distance was what made the job worthwhile, keeping the normal world normal, even if most people never knew what it cost. The drive back to Kansas City was quiet, the 3 rescued people sleeping off their ordeal in the van's rear seats. They'd have no memory of what really happened, thanks to drugs that would be administered during their medical evaluations. As far as they'd know, they'd been in a car accident and spent some time unconscious in a hospital. Reese watched the familiar landscape roll past in the darkness and allowed herself to feel satisfied with a job well done. Somewhere behind them, reality was already healing the wounds that had been torn in it tonight. The Morrison farm would go back to raising cattle and growing wheat, and the only sign of what had happened would be insurance paperwork explaining a mysterious barn fire. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Hope your work trip is going well. The kids are excited to see you next month." Reese typed back. "Trip went fine. Looking forward to that school play." And for the first time in days, she was telling the complete truth.